Hi, I'm Vince McGrail. I'm the Executive Director of the Alzheimer's Association here in Central Ohio. On behalf of all of our association staff, we want to welcome you to this presentation. June is Alzheimer's Brain and Awareness Month. So we wanted to bring you the latest updates and research related to reducing dementia risk and brain health. And there's been a lot of interest in this presentation. We've had over 500 people from across the Midwest sign up for this presentation. Before we get started, I want to thank all of you who are already engaged in helping us move our mission forward as volunteers to deliver education programs or to lead support groups in each one of our communities, or as volunteer advocates who work to tell state legislators and members of Congress about your experience to push for policy change and increase government research funding. Or as participants or planners of our annual Walk to End Alzheimer's events, or the Longest Day, which is coming this June 21st. Volunteers help us reach more people and help us deliver on our mission in each community across this country. And fundraising helps fuel that work and helps fund important research that you'll hear more about in a moment. If tonight is the first time you've engaged with us, welcome. We are here for you whenever needed in each community and online at alz.org or through our helpline at 1-800-272-3900. Anytime, night or day, 24/7. During the presentation, please use the Q&A button to input questions, and we'll have time at the end of the presentation to answer some of these questions. Dr. Claire Sexton is Senior Director of the Scientific Programs and Outreach at the Alzheimer's Association. She works alongside a committee of expert researchers to develop scientific programming for the Alzheimer's Association International Conference, known as AAIC. It's the largest and most influential international meeting dedicated to advancing dementia science. Dr. Sexton also manages the AAIC Satellite Symposia, which brings researchers together to network and explore emerging dementia science in targeted areas around the world. She received her doctoral degree in psychiatry from the University of Oxford, and she holds a bachelor's degree in neuroscience from the University of Manchester. Prior to joining the association, Dr. Sexton served as the Atlantic Fellow for Equity and Brain Health at the Global Brain Health Institute, where her research focused on modifiable risk factors associated with risk for Alzheimer's and other dementias. I want to welcome Dr. Sexton.
Thank you so much, Vince. It's such a pleasure to be here in Ohio today and to be joined by all of you on the line. So today I'm going to be speaking more about really what some of the latest research is that we're seeing in terms of Alzheimer's and dementia. But just to kind of set the scene, I wanted to start with one of my favorite statistics about our aging population. And that's that it's predicted that more than half of all babies born this year will live to celebrate their 100th birthday. Now, when I'm giving an in-person talk and I share this statistic, I often ask the audience, who would like to live to 100 years old? And when I give talks to school kids and I ask this question, every single hand goes up. And my hand goes up too. I'm very much an optimist about our aging population. I think, the skills, the experience of older adults is, such a huge asset to our society. But when I give this talks to older adults, then it's often only about half of people who put their hand up. And once no one did. And a major reason for this is that people are, as we go older, mindful of the impact of age-associated illnesses on quality of life. And a key challenge we face today is maximizing the health of older adults to allow people to live well as live longer. And the good news is that a healthy lifestyle has been shown not only to be associated with a longer life expectancy among both men and women, but also a larger proportion of remaining years without Alzheimer's dementia. So this is a study that's just been published just in the last month or two, and then it looked at individuals, and it looked at 5 different factors. So it looked at whether they were getting enough physical activity, cognitive activity, not smoking, looked at their healthy diet, and also that the alcohol was in the light to moderate range. And it found that for women, than those women who had ticked 0 or only one of those healthy lifestyle boxes. They had around 21 years of life expectancy at 65 years. So then that means they at 65 years they could be expecting to live till 86 years. And within those extra 21 years, then it was approximately 4 years of those would be lived with Alzheimer's disease on average. If you compare this to the people who were ticking 4 or 5 of those healthy lifestyle boxes, they lived an extra 3 years on average, so 24 years after the age of 65. But only 2.6 of those years were lived with Alzheimer's disease. They did similar analysis looking at men, and it was a same story. We know that men have typically shorter life expectancy, but it was the same take home that with additional healthy behaviors, there was longer lifespan and also less time lived with Alzheimer's dementia. So today then kind of, you know, having just set the scene with the importance of this and the opportunities that there are, I wanted to first take a step back and go through some of the basics of Alzheimer's and dementia. Then I'll talk about, you know, what the latest is we're seeing in terms of those research advances in risk reduction, and dive a bit more into the research into physical activity and sleep. And then finally, I'll talk a bit more about the role of the Alzheimer's Association in accelerating research. So first off, the basics. Now, one of the most common questions we still get asked within communities is, you know, what's the difference between Alzheimer's and dementia? So dementia is an umbrella term that's used to describe a range of symptoms, and this includes changes in memory. So for example, difficulty remembering newly learned information, forgetting material that's just been read. It also involves changes in thinking. So this can be challenges in planning or solving problems or difficulties concentrating. And also changes in behavior. So then this can be as a result of changes in mood or apathy or personality. Now, in order for a diagnosis of dementia to be made, these symptoms must be severe enough to interfere with daily life. So lead to problems keeping appointments, keeping track of monthly bills, affecting an individual's work or their relationships. And underneath that umbrella, there are many different causes or types of dementia. So this includes Alzheimer's disease, but it also includes vascular dementia, frontotemporal dementia, also mixed dementia when there's more than one cause or type of dementia is very prevalent. And each type of dementia has its own unique set of symptoms, progression, and also underlying brain changes. So with Alzheimer's disease, this is the most common cause or type of dementia, and it's characterized by 3 main hallmarks in the brain. So it's characterized by the presence of amyloid plaques, by tau tangles, and also by resulting cell loss. And we now know that these changes in the brain that were related to Alzheimer's begin many, many years before the symptoms of the disease can be seen. So they begin in an area of the brain called the medial temporal lobe, sometimes 10, 20 years before the onset of symptoms. And this is a region of the brain that's associated with short-term memory. Then over time, the changes in the brain progress to affect other areas of the brain and other areas of functioning, such as affecting speech and movement. But the exact progression, both in terms of what's happening in the brain and in terms of the resulting symptoms, will differ for each individual. So, you know, one phrase is that once you've met one person living with dementia, you've met one person living with dementia, because each person will have their own unique path. Another common question that we get is, you know, what is the cause of Alzheimer's and other dementias? Why is it that some people develop Alzheimer's and other people don't? So we're still trying to understand that. You know, we know that there's not one simple, easy cause of Alzheimer's disease, but instead there are multiple risk factors. So this includes our age. So Alzheimer's is not a normal part of the aging process, but age is the greatest risk factor. Our genes. So genes that guarantee that someone will develop Alzheimer's are really quite rare, but there is a host of other genes that can contribute to our risk. So they can either increase our risk or other genes can decrease our risk. You know, our health matters, our environment matters, and our behavior matters as well. And I'll be talking a bit more about these factors in more depth because they are modifiable. Now, for all of these, there's no guarantees. So it's possible to have a full house of risk factors and not develop dementia. But it's also possible to have relatively few risk factors and have a healthy lifestyle and still develop dementia. But while these types of risk factors, you know, they're not deterministic in guaranteeing a particular outcome, but they do contribute to our overall risk profile. And then when we look at a population level, we can see that the impact that they're having. And the prevalence of these factors then will impact upon the numbers of people living with dementia and associated statistics. You know, and these statistics are really quite striking. So there's an estimated over 220,000 people, 22,000 people living with Alzheimer's in Ohio. And this is part of a larger national picture where there's more than 6 million Americans who are living with Alzheimer's, who are aged 65 years and older. And we know these numbers don't just impact upon the individuals, but also upon their families. So there are over 11 million Americans who provide unpaid care for people with Alzheimer's or other dementia. And these caregivers provided over 16 billion hours of care in 2021. And as well as personal costs, then there's economic costs. So in 2022, Alzheimer's and other dementias will cost the nation $321 billion, it's estimated. Now, with an aging population and greater numbers of older adults, these figures are set to rise. So it's estimated that there'll be 12 million older Americans living with Alzheimer's by 2050, and that costs could rise to nearly $1 trillion. And the impact of Alzheimer's and dementia is not shared equally. So this was illustrated in a special report by the Alzheimer's Association published last year on race, ethnicity, and Alzheimer's in America. And it described how disparities are still impacting health and healthcare. So it stated that despite decades of research and calls to action to ensure that healthcare is accessible and equal for all, regardless of gender, race, ethnicity, geography, and socioeconomic status, this aim is still far from reality for too many Americans. So older Black and Hispanic Americans are disproportionately more likely than older white Americans to have Alzheimer's or other dementias. Black, Hispanic, and Asian Americans are less likely than white Americans to receive a timely diagnosis. And Black, Hispanic, and Asian Americans remain, though, underrepresented in research. So understanding and addressing these health disparities is a key focus and a key theme of the association's work. And really it's research, though, that offers hope in changing those statistics and changing the trajectory of those statistics going forward. And one key area of research is then into modifiable risk factors. So we're not doing like a formal poll, but this is then just if you want to have a guess in your own homes, then what proportion of dementia cases do you think could potentially be prevented or delayed by targeting modifiable risk factors? Do you think it could be up to 40%, up to 30%, or up to 20%? So just have a guess amongst yourselves. This was a figure which was from a review of all of the data looking at modifiable risk factors, which was debuted at our annual conference, AAIC, back in 2020. And it actually found that up to 40% of dementia cases could potentially be prevented or delayed by targeting modifiable risk factors. So, you know, these statistics, again, are so striking. But what types of factors, you know, can help reduce our risk? Well, there's been a wide variety. You know, there's been huge numbers. I think one study identified that there was, you know, over 360 different factors that have been looked at by different studies. So really, you know, one for every day of the year. They can be grouped into different domains though. So we know that our health is important and the healthcare that we receive. So neurological health has been associated with risk. So for example, traumatic brain injury, especially severe and repeated traumatic brain injuries, have been shown to be a risk factor. Psychiatric health has been implicated, so depression or anxiety. And for example, with depression, it's likely a bi-directional relationship where depression may constitute a risk factor, but also depression may be a feature of Alzheimer's and dementia as well sometimes. Our cardiovascular health matters. So what's good for the heart is good for the head. So diabetes is a risk factor, hypertension is a risk factor. Sensory health matters. So hearing loss has been shown to be a risk factor. And there's also more emerging research looking at vision and whether vision impairment can be a risk factor as well. And our sleep matters as well. So then this is something that I'll talk about a bit more later on in this talk. Now, our health is influenced by the environments in which we grow up in which we live in. So in terms of our physical environment, air pollution has been shown to be a risk factor, and the good news is that improving levels of air quality within the United States has been associated with reducing dementia risk. Our social environment and our economic environment matters. So low socioeconomic status is also associated with increased risk of Alzheimer's and dementia. And our environment then also can impact upon our activity levels. So physical activity, social activity, cognitive activity have all been associated by some studies with risk for Alzheimer's and dementia, with increased levels of activity being beneficial. Also, diet and alcohol has been implicated as well. So there's research, across all of these factors, and, some are more emerging, some are more well established. Some of the evidence base comes from observational studies, some looking at interventional studies, but there's really, so much work going on in this area. And I wanted to kind of give a couple of case examples just about, what the latest research is, and starting with physical activity. So with this, just to kind of set the scene and give a bit of history into physical activity research, I wanted to introduce you to the work of Jeremy Morris. So Jeremy Morris died in 2009, and he was aged 99 and a half. And even into his 90s, Jerry would swim, cycle, or walk for at least half an hour every day. So I think today, few of us would challenge the idea that keeping active in that way can help increase our odds of a long and a healthy life. But it hasn't always been that well accepted. And Jeremy has been referred to as the man who invented exercise, because it was his research that played a key role in changing our thinking. So back in 1953, Jeremy published one of the first studies to examine the links between physical activity and health. So the study compared heart attack rates between London bus drivers, who were spending all of their days sitting down, and London bus conductors, who would be spending their days on their feet, going up and down the stairs, checking tickets. And Jeremy and his colleagues found that the incidence of heart attacks in the drivers was double that of the conductors. Now, it's hard to believe it now, but at the time, then this was, a very controversial finding. And it's hard to believe that it was a controversial finding because, since there's been such a wealth of research that's established that physical exercise, can impact upon our health. And it can impact upon a wealth of different health benefits. So we know that it strengthens our bones, joints, and muscles, so reducing our risk of falls. Also reduces our risk of heart attacks and stroke, and improves recovery from them. It was also been shown to reduce risk of some cancers. And there's increasing evidence that it's good for our brain. So in terms of risk for dementia, then a lot of these studies have been primarily observational studies, and one of the meta-analyses looking across all different studies done to date have been showing that physical exercise is associated with a 20% reduced risk of developing Alzheimer's and dementia. And this kind of figure of around 20%, this one study showed that was relatively consistent no matter what age group that they were looking at. So if they were looking at people and their exercise habits in, between their 30s and 50s, or if they were looking at people in their 60s, or if they were looking even at people in their 70s, they found that this relationship held. So, this is good news to kind of show that it's never really too early or to be too late to be thinking about what we can be doing to reduce our risk. And the association then now is looking at these relationships between physical activity and the brain from a variety of different angles. So one of these is, looking at why does exercise affect the brain? And there's been multiple mechanisms that have been proposed. So when we're active, then, our body has, a great physiological response. Our heart rate increases, we start to sweat, we can feel the lactic acid that is produced by our muscles build up and can possibly cause cramps. And, a lot of these then reactions that, to exercise result from our body promoting moieties, which are called exokines. And these can be produced by various organs throughout the body. So for example, they're produced within our muscles when we exercise. So one example of that is lactic acid. Another one is called irisin. And this was only discovered first in 2012, and it was named after the Greek messenger god Iris. And irisin is produced by muscles, and then it's been shown to enter the bloodstream and then cross the blood-brain barrier and enter the brain. And then also it's been shown that when we're active, then the brain also kind of upregulates release of other chemicals. So looking at brain-derived neurotrophic factor. So these are called neurokines. And the net effect of these releases of these neurokines is then beneficial on the brain. So leading to increased rates of neurogenesis. So that's the birth of new neurons in certain confined areas of the brain. Increased synaptogenesis. So this is increased connections between different brain cells, and also reduced inflammation. Now, much of this work has been done in animal studies. So then we're still trying to understand even better these types of relationships and what we can translate from animal studies through to human studies. But what's really tantalizing is, I think for a long time, we think about, how can we bottle the effects of exercise? We know it's so good for us, and understanding these pathways, gives us, those types of hints and those types of understanding. So that's, some of the ways in which physical activity may be beneficial on our brain through these types of direct physiological pathways. But another way is then, that it may be mediated indirectly through third factors. So we discussed, the host of ways that physical activity is beneficial. That physical activity can help with depression. That physical activity, depending on the type of activity that we do, often involves some type of cognitive activity, involves hand-eye coordination, it involves thinking. It also can involve social activity if we're doing, a team sport or going out for a walk with friends. Being active in the day can also help us get a better night's sleep at night. And then physical activity we know is good for our cardiovascular health and keeping our blood pressure and BMI under control. So again, the benefits of physical activity may be tied to some of those direct pathways, but also indirectly mediated by some of these third factors as well. So hopefully that's kind of convinced you a little bit about the benefits of keeping active, on health in general and including brain health. But what types of activity really are beneficial and how much do we need to be doing them? So in terms of what types of activity are beneficial, then, these are grouped into kind of three main areas. Activities that raise our heart rate. So this can be divided into moderate intensity activities that raise our heart rate, but that we're still able to keep up a conversation while we're doing it. So things like brisk walking or maybe going cycling on the flat. So here in Ohio, you have that, lots of opportunities for that. Before I was in San Francisco and there was no nice flat cycle paths, it was all hills. Or there can be more vigorous intensity exercises as well, which are those ones which then, are more difficult to keep up a conversation while we're doing them. It's also important to be doing activities that strengthen our muscles. This doesn't have to be going to the gym and lifting weights, but it can be, carrying groceries back from the car, making sure you park a little bit further to lengthen that journey. And also for adults over the age of 60, activities that maintain flexibility are recommended. So then this then can be the activities like yoga, for example. And the guidelines that were recommended, look to state that if you're getting, 150 minutes per week, at a population level, then that's shown to have health benefits. And this spans all areas of health. It's not just combined to Alzheimer's and dementia, but it's across cardiovascular health and other areas as well. Also, if you're doing muscle strengthening activities and flexibility exercises on at least 2 days a week, then again, that's associated with health benefits. Now, it's important to state that even though, we look at these guidelines of 150 minutes and how many people meet them, any exercise is better than no exercise. So anything is better than nothing. And it's not about going straight in and trying to tick all of these boxes, but it's, about talking to your clinician if you're starting an exercise program and then taking it step by step. And if you get more than 150 minutes, then some studies have shown that getting even higher levels, so getting 300 minutes a week, has been associated by some studies with even further benefits. However, a key cause for concern is that, in the latest release of data by the CDC, that showed that 1 in 4 Americans report doing no physical activity in the past month outside of their regular job. So this question asked, during the past month, other than your regular job, did you participate in any physical activities or exercises, such as running or golf or gardening or walking for exercise? And 1 in 4 to 25% reported no activity outside of their job. And, these are striking figures again, and these will have an impact on the health of the nation. And, it's not just looking at individuals, but it's looking instead at our environments and how we can promote activity. Because, when we're thinking about promoting activity, it's not that, swimming is better than cycling, is better than running and for health, but really the best activity is the one that we do regularly. And that will be influenced by, what activities we enjoy, and it will also be influenced by our environment. So the activities that we enjoy, for all the people who are on this call today, we likely enjoy something slightly different. It will vary according to our personality in terms of our culture, our talents, our schedules. And it's important for research to be examining different ways of keeping active. So one example of this is then there's a research study going on at the moment, which is called the Rhythm Experience and Africana Culture Trial. So in 2014, we awarded a grant to Kirk Erickson to be doing a feasibility study of this trial. So this is a trial to promote cognitive health and mood and well-being in older African Americans. And the study recruited African Americans aged 65 years and older, and it randomized the participants to a moderate intensity African dance intervention or an education and discussion control group. And both groups met for 1 hour, 3 times a week over 6 months. And this feasibility study allowed Dr. Erickson and his team to see what challenges were encountered during recruitment and what challenges arose during the intervention, and to find methods to optimize the design of the study and the implementation of it. So building on that experience, Dr. Erickson applied to the NIA for a larger trial of 180 people, examining the effects of this intervention on cognition and on brain volumes. And he was awarded this grant in 2018. The study began in 2019 and it's due to finish next year in 2023. So here then it's important, it's showing the variety of different types of exercises which are being explored, and how then we can have different types of interventions which will appeal to a diverse range of individuals. But as we said, it's not just about, an individual's choice in what activities they start doing. It's not that simple, because if we think about also our environment, if we think about, just what influences how likely you are to go for a walk, this is influenced by, how walkable there are facilities nearby. If there's a nice shop at the end of the road to go and walk to, are there well-maintained sidewalks? Are there green spaces if you're going for a walk during the day? Is it well lit if you're going for a walk at night? Is it safe in terms of crime? Is there a low likelihood of traffic accidents? And we know that, such environments aren't equally available and aren't equally accessible to all. And, lack of access to safe and convenient places to be physically active may contribute to some, to the lower levels of physical activity, and also to disparities that we observe. And looking at in terms of environment and physical activity is not just important, before a diagnosis and be looking at our risk, but also post-diagnosis. So I wanted to highlight this study that the association is funded in Canada, which is called Nature Connections. And it's around dementia-friendly park visits. So Dr. Dalasitz and his team are working in partnership with local park organizations, and they're going to evaluate really the environment. So the ease of moving around, the access to public transport, traffic and parking, feeling of safety, and also importantly, what are the sound and noise levels as well. And they'll also evaluate the impact of a 12-week park visit program on cognition and other behavioral symptoms, including stress among individuals with dementia and their caregivers. So then again, looking at how we can optimize our environments in order to be promoting safe physical activity. So that's kind of given, a taste of some of the different physical activity research that's going on. Next, I wanted just to talk a little bit more about sleep. So the relationship between sleep and dementia is likely to be bidirectional. So sleep disturbances may be a consequence of dementia. We know that 60 to 70% of people with cognitive impairment or dementia have sleep problems. And this can be, for example, in Alzheimer's disease, frequent daytime napping, nighttime wakefulness, and also sundowning, which is when there's agitation and confusion that increases in the evening and can continue through the night. And such sleep problems have a significant impact on the individual, but also family members. And it makes sleep problems a leading cause for individuals moving into residential care settings. But sleep is interesting because it may not only just be, a consequence of dementia, but also represent a contributing factor to the disease process. And, a key question with regards to sleep is, how do we intervene? Again, how can we look at what is the impact of improving sleep? What do these interventions have impact in terms of short term on our cognition, and also long term in terms of our risk for Alzheimer's and dementia? Well, unlike for physical activity where it's looked like, it seems that, if you're exercising, whether you're cycling or you're running or you're walking, they all can have benefits on your health. Different approaches to improving sleep may have different impacts. So sleep apnea, for example, has been associated with increased risk of dementia. And the treatment of obstructive sleep apnea with continuous positive airway pressure, or CPAP, has been associated with improvements in some cognitive domains in the short term, and also with a reduced risk of dementia in the long term by some studies. And personally, I think that the evidence regarding CPAP is, really quite encouraging, and I'm excited to see more studies in this area. In contrast, insomnia has also been associated with increased risk of dementia by some cohort studies, but studies examining the effect of common medications for insomnia have been mixed. And some studies have even associated long-term use of insomnia medications with increased risk of developing dementia. So more work needs to be done to unpick these associations. But the good news with regards to insomnia is that it's actually cognitive behavioral therapy that's the preferred first-line therapy for chronic insomnia. So CBTI considers an individual's thoughts. So it teaches techniques to calm the racing mind that can, make it difficult to get to sleep at night. It also considers lifestyle during the day. So, looking at physical activity levels, or also looking at, when we stop drinking caffeine during the day. And then finally, it considers sleep schedule and setting at night. So it encourages a set routine of going to bed at a certain time and rising at a certain time, and ridding our bedroom of phones and TVs and distractions. And it can be administered in a number of ways. It can be administered one-on-one with a therapist. It can be administered as part of a group therapy, or through a book or a website or an app. And, what's nice with a digital approach is that it can be more easily accessible. So, no waiting list, for example. And the association is funding studies the world over to look at the effects of, cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia, not just on its impact on sleep, but also its impact on cognitive outcomes. And these studies span disease course. So in Australia, we're funding Stephanie Rainey-Smith, who's examining CBTI in non-cognitively impaired older participants. In Greece, Elissaias Karagiorgio and Konstantinos Sakara are examining its use amongst people with mild cognitive impairment. And in the US, Glenna Brewster is examining its effects on people living with dementia. Now, importantly for these last two studies, then they're examining dyads, including both the individual with the diagnosis and their partner, because as we know and we've discussed, sleep disruptions can impact upon them too. And these studies will be, important in building the evidence base and helping us understand how we can improve sleep, what impact that has on cognition in the short term, and they can hopefully act as a springboard for further studies examining the benefits in terms of dementia risk in the long term as well. So we've highlighted a couple of risk factors in a bit more greater detail in how we can be improving physical activity levels, how we can be improving our sleep. But ultimately, it may be that, improving multiple measures simultaneously has the most potential as accessible and sustainable community-based prevention programs. So for that reason, the Alzheimer's Association is leading the US Pointer Study. And this stands for the US Study to Protect Brain Health Through Lifestyle Intervention to Reduce Risk. And US Pointer is recruiting participants between the ages of 60 and 79 years old who are not currently experiencing memory problems and who have room for improvement in terms of their lifestyle behaviors. So for example, they may have a low level of physical activity. So in total, 2,000 individuals will be recruited. We're now about 3/4 of the way there. So we have over 1,500 enrolled. And the intervention is a 2-year program, and it compares a self-guided lifestyle intervention to a structured lifestyle intervention. And it includes looking at physical activity, nutritional counseling and modification, cognitive and social stimulation, and also improved self-management of health status. So as I said, we're still recruiting for this study, and then the participants have newly enrolled will have 2 years to participate in it. So it will be a little while longer before we hear results of this study. But again, it's another kind of area of active research. Now, finally, I wanted to speak a little bit about, the role of the Alzheimer's Association is playing in accelerating research. Throughout this talk, I've illustrated the advances that we have seen with, research studies from all different career stages and, from all different types of angles. And really, you'd be hard-pressed finding a researcher that hasn't been supported by the association in some way, shape or form by the association, either by our funding or by our convening. So first off, in regards to funding, through the Alzheimer's Impact Movement, the association advocates for increases to the NIH budget. And the landscape for research funding for Alzheimer's and all dementia research in the US has changed really dramatically over the past decade. So our AIM volunteers up and down the country have really led the way in ensuring the highest possible increases in funding year upon year. And they've had a transformative impact. So 10 years ago, the NIH budget for Alzheimer's and related dementia research was around the 500 million mark. Now the NIH budget stands at over 7 times that amount, at just shy of $3.5 billion. And, you know, as a member of the research community, this is just so exciting to see, you know, because we know that our investment in research in terms of our time, our energy, our funding will be directly proportional to the progress we make in this field. And we've seen this historically with other disease areas like cardiovascular disease and cancer, where there's been significant advances due to years of sustained funding. Now, as well as advocating for increases in funding by the NIH, the Alzheimer's Association are also the largest non-profit funder of Alzheimer's and all dementia research in the world. So we currently have over $300 million in active research funding. This is supporting 920 projects across 45 different countries. So those countries span right from Botswana to Brazil, from Singapore to Spain, from my home UK to the US. We do that because we don't know where that next discovery will come from. And we put that money to use, you know, in a variety of ways. We put it to use seeding new ideas, so creating and launching studies that others aren't funding. So example for that was that REACT trial, looking at the African dance intervention, where we seeded the research and then it's been gone on to receive further funding from the NIH. Also speeding the development of new techniques and therapies so that we can take those findings, you know, which look promising, and advance them through to our communities. And then also scaling the research, so making it, the science bigger and better. And, you know, an example of both of these is, you know, through the US Pointer Star, to being able to do these large scale studies, multi-site studies. But as well as, you know, seeding, speeding and scaling research, you know, on a global basis, we're also doing it within your region. So we have $2.1 million of active funding supporting 11 projects in Ohio across a variety of different institutions. And then there's a variety of different aspects of research that they're engaged in. So they're looking, we have researchers who are looking at trying to understand, why does Alzheimer's disease progress faster in some individuals and slower in others? And, you know, is it key to that understanding, that looking at how the tau protein spreads within the brain? We have other researchers looking at, you know, what's the next biomarker that's going to enter the field? Could it be looking at, you know, skin samples, and what opportunities are there for skin tests to be looking at measures of amyloid and tau? And then also not going through to the other end of the scale and looking at dementia care. So there's researchers looking at whether a computer-based tool can benefit quality of life in residential care for people with Alzheimer's disease and help, you know, personalized dementia care. So all of this research is going on your doorstep in the region, and we're also connecting those researchers, you know, within your region to that global network. So we do that through our convening. So our landmark event annually is the Alzheimer's Association International Conference, AAIC. It's the world's largest and most influential meeting dedicated to advancing dementia science. Last year, we had a hybrid approach. So we had 1,200 people in Denver, and we had 11,000 join us virtually around the world. And in just a few weeks' time, we'll be doing the same in San Diego. So we have over 3,000 researchers registered who will be joining us in person. And then also virtual registration is open, so that, you know, wherever they're based, no matter their, you know, their funding, their ability to travel, the best minds the world over can be joining the conference and can be sharing ideas and sparking new ideas as well. And this quote, you know, came in about our approach to convening, that it's opened up the world to share the science. And, you know, it's just so inspiring to hear. If you would like to hear some of the latest findings that come out of our conference, or some of the many other research updates that are happening, I can recommend downloading the Alzheimer's Association Science Hub app. So this is a free app that provides the latest news, information, and expert views about Alzheimer's and dementia research. So it's free, you can download it and you can get those updates. Or if you're interested in participating in a trial, so this research simply isn't possible without people kindly volunteering their time. And now there's a wide variety of trials that that people can participate in. So if you look at Trial Match, you're able to input your details. You can search what's going on on your doorstep if there's any trials regionally, but also what opportunities there are to participate in remote studies, virtual online studies as well. So I think this brings us pretty much exactly on time. We've had like a whistle-top tour across many different factors. So we covered the basics of Alzheimer's and dementia. We looked at some of the latest research advances in risk reduction, the many different factors which have been associated with risk, and then a couple diving into physical activity and sleep, a bit more about what work is going on, and then highlighting the role that the Alzheimer's Association is playing in really accelerating research globally. So I know there's also a lot that I didn't have time to cover. We didn't, talk about diet, for example, in terms of risk factor. We didn't talk about too much about blood pressure, but I'm very happy to answer any questions and that you may have.
Thanks, Dr. Sexton. Let's take a look at some of the questions that we've had put in, and we can kind of go through. There's the first one here, a more basic question about the types of dementia that there are, the number of types. And could you talk a bit about mild cognitive impairment and how that relates?
Yes. So yeah, there are many different types of dementia, Alzheimer's disease being the most common cause or type of dementia. Other types being frontal temporal dementia, dementia with Lewy bodies, vascular dementia, Parkinson's dementia. With regard to Alzheimer's disease, then there's also a diagnosis that can be made, mild cognitive impairment. And this is when then there can be problems with somebody's memory or concentration and thinking that can be noticeable for the individual and can be seen through cognitive tests, but it's not yet at that level where it's interfering with somebody's activities of daily life. So then it's not yet severe enough to meet the diagnosis of dementia. Now, people can get diagnosed with mild cognitive impairment, and there can be a variety of different outcomes. So some people then, within a number of years may progress and may develop Alzheimer's dementia. Others may kind of stay stable. Others still may then, have a diagnosis of mild cognitive impairment, but then go back and have kind of normal cognition for somebody of their age. So researchers, are trying to understand, the different types of outcomes, what can, reduce the risk of going from mild cognitive impairment to dementia, and then also then looking at, intervening early. So then looking at if somebody has mild cognitive impairment, and if they're also showing the buildup of, amyloid plaques in their brain, then what treatments can be administered in order to kind of help slow the progression from those very earlier stages.
Thanks. There's several questions in here about memory, over-the-counter memory aids that are advertised nationally. Can you comment on some of those and how they might affect or help someone that's having some cognitive issues?
Yes, so I mean, it would be great if it was as simple as that there was, a single supplement that we could be taking that would be beneficial, but unfortunately, that's not the case. Then there are supplements that get advertised, but there's nothing that's, been approved by the FDA, and there isn't that yet, that evidence base behind them. So if we're thinking in terms of, supplements or in terms of, wider in terms of diet, then it's an overall healthy diet which is beneficial. It's not that there's, one particular supplement, one particular vitamin, or one particular food type that's beneficial. But instead, there's been different diets, and I can speak a bit more about the different types of diets if that would be helpful.
Yeah, if you don't, we've got a few minutes here. Do you mind talking a little bit about some of the diets?
Yeah, of course. So then with diets, then there's kind of been three main diets that have been looked at. So then one is the Mediterranean style diet. One is then, dietary approaches to stop hypertension, which is called the DASH diet. And then there's also been kind of the MIND diet, which combines those two diets and also adds on extra nutrients which have been associated with, kind of brain health. So all of these three diets have, there's certain foods that they promote, and there's certain foods that they encourage us to limit or to avoid. So in terms of what to promote, then, green leafy vegetables, certain, fruits, including, berries, fish and oily fish, for example. All of these kind of, natural foods, are kind of commonly implicated across these types of diets. In terms of what to avoid, then it's kind of a story that we're familiar with in terms of, really kind of deep fried fatty foods and, those types of foods to be trying and minimizing or avoiding. So there's many ways to kind of have these types of diets. It's not that there's, certain recipes that you need to be doing. It's, again, trying to enjoy the activities that we do in the diet that we have, so that it's more sustainable. And again, in terms of like with physical activity, there's interventional, there's clinical studies, clinical trials going on, looking at these diets and then looking at their effects on the brain.
There's some questions in here about blood pressure. If someone has high blood pressure, but they control it with daily meds, is that still a major risk factor? Can you talk a little bit about blood pressure?
Yes, so then blood pressure is interesting. So there was a big study a few years ago called the SPRINT study, and then this looking at trying a more kind of intensive blood pressure and lowering. So then looking at trying to get blood pressure down to 120 milligrams of mercury rather than 140. And it found that, having this lower target and getting blood pressure even lower then was beneficial in terms of cardiovascular events, beneficial in terms of reducing risk of mortality, and then also beneficial in terms of reducing risk for mild cognitive impairment and dementia. And really, then this study, though it was looking at reducing blood pressure, it didn't look at, how to be doing this, whether just one thing. So it would be looking at combination of meds, but then also, lifestyle changes we know can impact upon hypertension as well. So with a lot of these, then in terms of looking at treatments, it's tricky to tease apart all of the effects. But in general, it wouldn't be that there's, a certain type of blood pressure medication which is, beneficial over the others. It would be just having a conversation with your clinician to talk about which medications and which lifestyle changes would be beneficial for you and which would suit somebody as an individual.
There's several comments about alcohol and cigarette smoking and the effects of the risk effects, or if you stop smoking, can that help?
Yeah, so I'll take the easier one of those first. So that relates to cigarettes. So smoking has been shown to be a risk factor, and also the good news is that then stopping smoking has been shown to be beneficial. So then if you stop smoking, then your risk profile can go down. So that's just yet another reason then to not be smoking, or to be trying to quit smoking if you are a smoker. In terms of alcohol, then the literature is a bit more mixed. So there's been different studies it's more consistent if you look at like excessive alcohol abuse, so going above and beyond those guidelines consistently, that's been associated with increased risk for Alzheimer's and other dementia. In terms of what the safe limit is, then there's debate. So some studies then can show that, light to moderate alcohol use, is not associated with increased risk. But there's been other studies that then, suggesting that maybe there's no safe limit for alcohol. So these again are being examined now in huge studies. So there's studies, some of this alcohol data is, there's a large study from the UK Biobank study, which is, 500,000 people, and they have MRI scans. They're getting MRI scans on 100,000 of them. And they're looking at, alcohol levels, alcohol use, and also levels over time as well. So there'll be more coming out of that. I think there'll be more debate. I know it's hard, as a consumer, it can seem sometimes that you turn the page on a Monday and it's, a glass of red wine is good every day, and you turn the page on a Tuesday and it's not. But in general, it is that, excessive alcohol abuse is a risk factor, but that light to moderate may be fine, but there's still some debate.
Okay. There's a question in here about there's someone who's wants to know how early someone could be tested, that they're in their late 20s with a mother who has severe Alzheimer's, wants to know how early someone could be tested.
So then usually then it's what drives people to be going to get tested is if they've noticed changes in their memory, or more frequently then it can be, family members can notice changes in somebody's memory or their functioning, and that leads to them going and speaking to their clinician about what changes they observe and what could be contributing to those. And then if there are those symptoms, then it will be looking at what underlying, what could be contributing to them, because, there can also be, factors which are more treatable, more reversible, that can be contributing to changes in cognition. It's not that there's, tests that are, routinely used in clinic just to be looking at risk. So that's not yet the case, but there is lots of research going on into biomarkers. So biomarkers then give us clues into what's happening in the brain. So, we've known for it's over 100 years, we could only know if somebody had amyloid plaques or tau tangles through post-mortem study. Now we're able to be seeing, their presence through amyloid PET scans and tau PET scans, and also then the levels in the blood impact the levels in the cerebral spinal fluid. So we can look at through lumbar punctures or spinal taps, and they also impact upon levels in the blood. So there's, development of blood tests. Now these tests, they're not used routinely clinically yet, on a widespread basis. They're also, some of them are far more kind of in development than others, but I just want to kind of give a taste of some of these new kind of tools which are coming down the pipeline, and then in future years might be used to be looking at somebody's risk profile, but it's not at that stage just yet.
I think we just have time for one more question here. There's a question. Recently heard that there's research going on looking at inflammation in the brain as a possible cause of Alzheimer's. Can you speak to that?
Yes, and yeah, we could do a whole hour on inflammation because it's such an interesting relationship, and it really speaks to then how we're understanding, the mechanisms and the brain changes, and also looking at what changes, when. So for regards to inflammation, there can be, beneficial effects, early on in the course of disease, where, there can be an immune response, and that can help, remove some of the amyloid in the brain, and that type of inflammation seen there can be beneficial. Whereas in the later stages, then there can be more harmful types of inflammation. So there's different, approaches that are under investigation, whether it's then, targeting it in different ways at different stages of the disease, and also looking at it, you know, because it's a common factor across multiple types of dementia. So then looking at it within Alzheimer's dementia, but also we're funding a researcher who is looking at it, you know, in terms of a target for frontal temporal dementia. So again, lots of research going on, and lots more to kind of look out for, and you can look on Science Hub app, and I'm sure there'll be stories coming out along those lines.
Well, thank you, Dr. Sexton. I appreciate the time, and I was going to suggest that is the hub, the app that you mentioned is a great tool. I use that to get information on the latest research, as well as alz.org website, alz.org/research. You can go there and look at information on research. But there are several questions here that were more care-related questions, and I would just urge you all to reach out to your local chapter, get the information from alz.org if you haven't contacted your chapter, and connect with the program staff that are available that can help you with care questions for your loved ones. So that brings us to the top of the hour. I appreciate your time, Dr. Sexton. Great presentation. I hope everyone has enjoyed it. Enjoy the rest of your summer, and have a great evening, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.